So Joe Biden gave a speech the other day, and he at least in part blamed his own stimulus check for inflation. So take a look at this. Throw up that graphic for me. Biden concedes his COVID stimulus checks fueled a spike in inflation. President Biden on Wednesday conceded that inflation is at a 3-decade high because people have more money now as a result of his $1.9 trillion COVID-19 stimulus legislation, recognizing a central point made by people who are arguing against a nearly $2 trillion sequel. Biden unexpectedly endorsed the stance of his critics, who have said the U.S. dollar is losing its buying power as a result of the government printing money to cover COVID-19 aid. The president said stimulus funds that he signed into law are in part to blame for demand exceeding the supply of goods, causing a backlog at major U.S. ports and the highest rate of annual inflation since 1990. The irony is people have more money now because of the first major piece of legislation I passed. You all got checks for $1,400. You got checks for a whole range of things, Biden said during a speech in Baltimore. If you're a mom and you have kids under the age of 7, you get $300 a month. And if it's over 7 to 17, you're getting $360 a month, he said, misstating the second amount, which is $250 per month. It changes people's lives, but what happens if there's nothing to buy and you get more money to compete for getting goods? It creates a real problem, Biden said. Okay. So first of all, even if you take what he's saying at face value, the COVID relief package was the main problem. Well, there were a number of COVID relief packages, and the overwhelming majority of the aid went directly to corporations. So if you're going to blame big spending, which I'll get to in a second why you definitely shouldn't, but if you were to blame big spending, the bulk of the blame goes at these giant corporate welfare checks, corporate subsidies that we hand out, because the second anything affects their bottom line, they cry bloody murder and they go begging to the government for a bailout and a handout. And then they get it because they bought the government. So even if you are going to blame big spending, talk about corporate welfare first. Talk about that. Remember that? All the money that was going, like the airline industry, for example, and then they turned around and laid people off anyway. You got billions of dollars so you wouldn't lay people off. Then they took the money and laid people off anyway. Exactly like what happened in the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis and Great Recession. You know, there were these giant bailouts that went to these financial companies that bankrupted themselves. And then they took the money and paid bonuses to the same assholes who just bankrupted their companies. Insane. So if you were to blame spending, you have to talk about that, because that $1,400 check was a lifeline to a lot of people. But beyond that, listen, he's just wrong. It has nothing to do with the COVID stimulus bills. It has everything to do with the destruction of our supply chain. And that, of course, on its own has a lot to do with the pandemic. There are a lot of complex macroeconomic reasons. And when you look at the specific industries as to how we led to inflation. So, for example, beef monopolies, that's one thing. That's one thing that's leading to inflation. Apparently, the shipping of PPE clogged the ports in a lot of countries because they would ship the PPE and then they would have to send it back to China, and then those ports got clogged. Of course, we're talking about in LA now. There's so many ships that, there's just basically like a traffic jam at the port. And so we have a shortage of supplies. That's what's leading to the inflation. So what do you do about that? Well, look, long run solution, very simple. You need to bring back American manufacturing, because we rely on so many other nations for so many goods. We rely on other nations for many goods that we can create here. And as soon as a pandemic hit, we realized, hey, we probably should have been more self-sufficient. But that went out the window in 2.5 minutes. People stopped thinking about it. People stopped talking about it. No politicians doing anything to substantively address that. But, if you want to, in the long run, protect against inflation, you should definitely do some antitrust stuff and crack down on monopolies, because that leads to a lot of price jacking. And you also need to fix the supply chain and reinvigorate American manufacturing. That's what you do. But Biden just conceded the argument of his opponents, which, as the New York Post points out, now they could turn around and say, well, of course then, but why would we support a $2 trillion bill now on top of the $1 trillion bill or $1.9 trillion bill we just did? You're admitting that the big spending is leading to inflation, so if we spend another $2 trillion, of course that's going to lead to inflation too. And Joe Manchin is now using this argument. He's like, look, I want to support Build Back Better, but what am I going to do? There's inflation. I have to not support it now. You have to take these myths head on. It's the exact same thing Manchin did with the deficit. Oh my God, the deficit. I can't vote for Build Back Better. It's going to add so much to the deficit. Meanwhile, Manchin just voted for a bill, the traditional infrastructure bill, which added about $250 billion to the deficit. He had nothing to say about the deficit for that bill. So he's lying about why he can't support it. He just doesn't want the big Build Back Better bill. And he's saying, oh, see, inflation with the spending bad. All right, we're done here. What am I going to do? I can't support it. And instead of taking that on, Biden agrees and implicates his own fucking stimulus check, which is one of the best things he did. Withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, the executive order to raise federal contractors and federal employees minimum wage to $15 an hour, and the $1,400 checks are the three best things that he did. The $1,400 checks, it's a little Weasley, though, because really he said $2,000. It should have been $2,000. So he lied, and he only did $1,400. He said, oh, Trump already did $600. So when you do the math, it's a Weasley way to get out of it. But it's still one of the best things he did. And instead of defending his policy and going on the offense, he's like, yeah, I guess maybe that probably led to inflation, and inflation is not good. You're saying one of your signature accomplishments was bad. I've never seen anything that politically stupid in my entire life. His approval rating is 38%. Gee, I wonder why. You don't do good things, and then the rare times that you do good things, you don't act like they're good things. You act like they're terrible things. Only on Afghanistan did he really, puff his chest out and say, fuck off, I'm right about this. That was pretty much it. Oh, man. Oh, this is not good. It is not good. So, listen, there's a reason why Republicans now have a 10-point lead on the generic ballot going into 2022. There's a reason why Biden's approval rating is 38% and Kamala's is 28%. We're looking at a wave that's even bigger than the 2010 Tea Party wave, and he's got nobody to blame for himself because he keeps doing stuff like this.